Come walk with me across a quiet, overlooked piece of the Minnesota prairie. Over the next mile, we will follow a narrow footpath through brown late winter grass and bare oak woods, out to the edge of a half-frozen lake. It looks like nothing much at first glance, but hidden in this ordinary ground is the whole story of a region, from the glaciers that shaped it, to the Dakota who called it home, to a single August morning nearby when this entire state changed forever. First, where are we? This is the Greenleaf Lake State Recreation Area, tucked into the rolling farm country of Meeker County, roughly halfway between the small towns of Litchfield and Hutchinson in central Minnesota. We are well west of the Twin Cities now, out where the big woods give way to open prairie, and the land is stitched together by hundreds of small lakes and marshes left behind by the ice. The park itself is small and wonderfully undeveloped, only around 385 acres wrapped around the shores of two connected lakes, Greenleaf and Sioux, with a wooded peninsula and islands reaching out between them. There is no campground here and no paved road, just a trailhead, a few footpaths, and a lot of open sky. It is a day-use place, meant for walking, watching, and listening. This is also one of the youngest units in the entire Minnesota State Park system. The legislature first set it aside as a state park in 2003, then a few years later, in 2007, re-established it as a state recreation area to keep the costs low and the footprint light. So the trail under our boots is genuinely new, even as the land it crosses is impossibly old. And it very nearly never existed. Back in 1985, a man named Mark Jayer bought a piece of this shoreline as a quiet retreat for his family. A few years later, when a developer drew up plans to line the lake with a housing complex, Jayer and his neighbors pushed back hard, and he arranged to buy the land himself to keep it wild. That single stubborn act of preservation is the only reason any of us can walk this shore today. The shape of everything here was written by ice. During the last great glaciation, a broad lobe of ice pushed down over central Minnesota, grinding and flattening the land, then melted back only about 10,000 years ago. As it withdrew, it left a jumbled country of low hills and countless shallow basins. Where huge buried blocks of ice slowly melted in place, the ground sagged and filled with water, and lakes like the ones before us were born. This scattered, watery landscape has a name. It is the prairie-pothole region, a vast belt of glacier-made wetlands that runs from right here up into the Canadian plains. These shallow marshes are so extraordinarily rich in life that they are often called the duck factory of North America, hatching a huge share of the entire continent's waterfowl every single spring, in exactly this kind of reedy, cattail-edged water. Now let me be honest with you about the season. This is the middle of March, the very hinge between winter and spring, and the prairie is caught bare and brown. The grasses lie flattened, the trees stand leafless, and the lake is still locked in a rim of gray shelf ice. This is not the glossy postcard version of Minnesota, but there is a stark, stripped-down honesty to the land like this, laid open to its very bones and simply waiting. Where the prairie yields to trees, we pass into groves of bur oak and red oak, basswood and elm. For thousands of years, this fluid edge between grassland and forest was held open by fire, a landscape called oak savanna. The bur oak is built for exactly that life, wrapped in thick, deeply furrowed, fire-resistant bark that lets it shrug off the prairie flames that would kill a thinner-skinned tree outright. And that makes this modest woodland far more precious than it looks. Oak savanna, that open, sunlit blend of scattered big trees and tallgrass prairie, was once one of the great signature landscapes of the American Midwest. Today it is among the rarest habitats on the continent. Well under 1% of the original savanna survives anywhere, plowed under or grown over long ago, which makes every protected acre like this one quietly extraordinary. The trees here hide another small surprise. On the peninsula and islands between the two lakes grows an unusual mix for Minnesota: rock elm and American elm woven together with basswood, green ash, and both bur and red oak. It is the kind of quirky, in-between forest that forms right where several different worlds overlap: prairie and woodland, north and south, upland and water, all pressing in on one small piece of ground. Long before any of these names appeared on a map, this was the homeland of the Dakota, and in particular the Bdewakantunwan, a name that means the dwellers by Mystic Lake. For countless generations, they moved across this exact country of prairie and pothole and oak, hunting deer and waterfowl, gathering through the turning seasons, and knowing every one of these small lakes not as scenery, but as part of a living, provided world. The Bdewakantunwan were one band among the wider Dakota, who belong in turn to the Osti-Sakowin, the Seven Council Fires, the great alliance of Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota peoples. Their older homeland lay to the east, around Bdewakan, the spirit lake we now call Mill Lacs, and over time they spread west into open country like this. To them, these were not empty acres. They were home, holy and full. This particular stretch of Meeker County also lay along a frontier between peoples. The prairie and its lakes were prized hunting ground, and the Dakota ranged across it while the Ojibwe pressed down from the woodlands to the north. It was a land of real abundance, but also a contested edge, laced with trails and camps that were already ancient long before a single wagon wheel ever pressed into this soil. Then came the treaties and the settlers. Meeker County was carved out of the territory in 1856 and named for a frontier judge, Bradley Meeker. Farmers filed onto the newly opened prairie, and the little settlement that would become Litchfield was renamed and platted in 1869, once the railroad finally pushed its way out here. But the few years just before that arrival were anything but peaceful on this land. By the early 1860s, the Dakota had been pressed onto a thin strip of reservation land along the Minnesota River, promised food and payments in exchange for nearly everything they had. Then the crops failed in 1861, a brutal winter followed, the game grew scarce, and the government payments came late while traders coldly refused any credit. Families went hungry, warehouses of food sat locked, and a deep, desperate anger built all through the summer of 1862. And it broke, right here in Meeker County. On the 17th of August, 1862, near the little settlement of Acton just west of where we now stand, a chance and bitter encounter between 4 young Dakota men and a group of settlers ended with 5 settlers dead. That single tragic morning is remembered as the spark of the United States-Dakota War, one of the most painful chapters in the whole history of this state. What followed swept far beyond this quiet county. Over roughly 6 weeks, the war claimed hundreds of lives up and down the Minnesota River Valley, settler and Dakota alike. It ended in mass military trials, in the largest execution in American history at Mankato, and in the forced exile of the Dakota people from their own homeland. To walk this prairie honestly is to carry that history gently with you, across the very region where it all began. So we walk on, a century and a half later, over ground that has seen glaciers and grass fires, abundance and heartbreak. That is the strange gift of a place like this. It holds all of it at once, layered and quiet, and it asks nothing of us except that we notice, that we slow our pace, and that we let the full weight and beauty of the land settle in as our boots keep moving down the trail. And then the trees open, and there it is. Greenleaf Lake, ringed in tan cattails and pale broken reeds, its wide open water still edged with a stubborn rim of late-season ice. On a still afternoon like this, the surface holds the whole blue and white sky, mirror smooth, and the only sound is the dry wind combing through the grasses. This is the simple reward waiting at the far end of the walk. Give the lake a moment, because it is right on the edge of transformation. In just a few short weeks, this quiet, ice-rimmed water will roar back to life. Ducks and geese and herons will pour into these potholes to nest, muskrats will work the cattails, and the first red-winged blackbirds will call from the reeds. Standing here in the hush of March, you are watching the deep breath the prairie takes right before spring. And this, in the end, is why a place like this matters. In a single unhurried mile, an ordinary-looking patch of Minnesota prairie has handed us glaciers and duck marshes, vanishing savanna and deep Dakota history, all of it saved from the bulldozer by a handful of people who simply loved this shoreline. There is nothing flashy here, and that is exactly the point. It is plain ground, made sacred by the act of paying close attention. Thank you for walking Greenleaf Lake with me. If this is the kind of overlooked, quietly storied place you love, subscribe and come along, because there is a whole world of small trails and enormous history still waiting out there, and we are exploring it together, one honest mile at a time. Until the next one, keep wandering and keep looking a little closer at the ground beneath your feet.